Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the philosophy of Heraclitus and Parmenides and how do they relate with each other. Although I have talked about both of these philosophers in one of my previous video, I was not quite satisfied with my explanation. So I thought that maybe I'll create or make a specific video only focusing on these two philosophers. So Heraclitus and Parmenides, both of them were most influential pre-Socratic philosophers who came up with metaphysical ideas which were very useful for Plato and Aristotle to systematize the metaphysics as a grandeur philosophy. Interesting thing is, both of these philosophers, although agree to some extent, are desperately in contradiction with each other. The only thing that both of these philosophers agree is the sensory organs that the human beings have cannot see reality as it is. Let me repeat that. Both of these philosophers agree on the fact that the sensory organs are limited. However, the nature of reality for them is completely different. For Heraclitus, the reality is constantly changing. The reality is in flux. Just like a river, the reality is constantly flowing. It's not stable. Like a fire, if you see the fire, you can see that in fire, the fire is constantly changing, transforming itself from one form to another form. Just like that, the reality is constantly changing. Another interesting thing he suggests is that the reality embodies the opposite facts. Day and night, good and evil, right? Up and down. So for Heraclitus, truth or God must embody the contradiction. For him, opposites are necessary for harmony, just like yin and yang in Chinese Taoism. Heraclitus also believes that the opposites are actually balancing each other, and they are absolutely necessary for harmony. South and North Pole is absolutely necessary for a magnet to establish its magnetic property. And that's why for Heraclitus there's nothing which is stable. And his philosophy is also known as philosophy of becoming. Because in his philosophy, the matter is constantly trying to become something else. It's trying constantly escaping itself and becoming something else. So this is called the philosophy of becoming, and that's why for becoming, contradiction is necessary. It has to cease to be what it is, and it has to attain what it is not, and this process should be constantly going on. For example, if you take a look at the seeds, right now, seed only exists. Tree does not exist in this seed. However, if the seed has to become tree someday, it has to cease to be seed. It has to die to the reality of seed, and a new reality called tree should emerge out. So you can see, something that exists has to cease to exist for another thing to come up in the existence, right? So the emergence of tree is in compensation of dissolution of seed. So you can see the contradiction. Here seed exists but tree does not, and when the seed becomes tree, tree exists but seed does not. So existence of seed and non-existence of tree is present in the seed, and in the similar manner existence of tree and non-existence of seed is present in the tree. So you can see the reality is constantly embodying the contradiction, and it's constantly becoming something else, becoming something else, becoming something else. So that's why for Heraclitus we cannot step on the same river twice, because we are also becoming something else. The river is also becoming something else. So there's no way that the same foot touches the same water in the river twice. So you can say a dynamic nature of reality, unstable. Nevertheless, Permenides also believe that the sensory organs are limited and sensory organs cannot perceive the ultimate reality. He did not believe that change or these impermanent appearances are the ultimate reality. While Heraclitus believed that contradiction is absolutely necessary for existence of seed. For example, when seed exists, the tree should not exist, and when tree exists, seed does not exist. But for Parmenides, there's a logical contradiction. How can something exist and at the same time non-exist? How can existence and non-existence coexist? Right? Logically, when we are thinking, if we think something is, then it must be. It should not cease to be. But here the seed is ceasing to be seed in order to become the tree. And what is not cannot be. But in the form of a seed, there is no tree. But later on, tree arises out of the seed. So how is it possible? This must be an illusion created by our sensory organs. Because when we think rationally, logically, this phenomenon seems very weird, logically not sound. How can tree come out of no tree? And where did the seed suddenly went into? How did it become no seed? So this phenomena is actually for Parmenides an illusion created by the sensory organs. And he suggests that, okay, we must not be seeing the true reality in this case, and the appearance and disappearance of both seed and tree are the mental illusions. Actually, the reality transcends both of them. And unlike what Heraclitus suggested, the reality is unchanging, stable, permanent, and there is no contradiction in it. It exists and it always will exist. There will be no time in past, present, and even in the future when the reality will cease to exist. That's why it's existence. There must be no contradiction in its existence. And if you say something does not exist, that means it does not exist at all. For instance, the movement from seed to tree, the movement from point A to point B, the gap between an event X to event Y actually are illusions for Parmenides. And later on, there were followers of Parmenides who actually tried to logically prove that the multiplicity and motion are illusion. Let me clarify their logic also here. So what they suggested was, suppose this polar end of the marker is point A and this end is point B. So you can see the distance from point A to point B is limited. Our sensory organs can measure it, right? Maybe it is 15 centimeters, so it's limited. But now imagine we are trying to cut it into half from 15 centimeter to 7.5 centimeter. Then again into half, 3.75 centimeter, half. If you keep on doing this, you can never reach to the ultimate point, and you can infinitely keep on doing that. Even if you have a point, you can magnify it and cut it into half. You can keep on doing it infinitely. So the finite distance can be divided into infinite number of small distances, dx. So that's a logically contradicting thesis, right? How can something be finite and at the same time infinite? Same thing happens to time. So the followers of Parmenides actually were trying to logically prove that the sensory datums such as distance, multiplicity, time, they are actually illusions created by our senses, and the reality actually cannot be grasped by sensory organs, and it must be one. It must be always existing. It must be stable. It must be permanent. What is must be, and what is not. For example, this phenomena appears and disappears. What is not cannot be. So you can see, completely rejecting the phenomena seen or observed or measured by the sensory organs, and accepting a rational truth which can only be reached with the help of the cognitive capacity of the brain, rationality. So for Heraclitus, it is the logos that is ultimate truth, because logos is constantly embodying the contradiction and constantly trying to change and become something else, and the opposites are actually creating the harmony. But for Parmenides, that's not true. The temporary reality that we see, the game of appearance and disappearance of object, of atoms, of human beings, it's a sensory illusion. We can understand these concepts in parallel to difference between Buddhism and Hinduism. What Buddha suggests is similar to what Heraclitus is suggesting. Everything is temporary, right? Everything comes into existence, leaves for some time, and then goes back into non-existence. There is no permanent reality according to Buddha. There is no permanent self. But for Shankaracharya, for the Hindu philosophy, no. This appearance and disappearance, this is a game of the Maya. This is a reality which is called Brahman behind, which transcends this appearance and disappearance, and at the same time are expressed as these appearance and disappearance. Heraclitus and Parmenides were two most influential pre-Socratic philosophers who influenced Plato and Aristotle, and while Heraclitus believed in changing reality, a dynamic reality, Parmenides completely disbelieved the phenomenon of appearance and disappearance, the phenomenon of multiplicity, distance, motion, time, and he suggested that all of these things are sensory illusions and the reality actually is permanent and oneness and we cannot know it by our sensory perceptions. We have to think rationally in order to recognize it.